champion.
Welcome back to Retro Wednesday at the Titanium Hangar. This is Mike. Today I want to talk to you about Classics versus Masterverse. Is Masterverse as good as Classics, or is Classics still better? Well, you know, when they first came out with Masterverse and announced it, I said I have no interest, but I'm more interested in Classics. But now that they've released quite a few figures and there's reveals for more, my mind is shifting and changing a bit. You'll be surprised, some of these will actually replace Classics figures on your shelf. We'll talk about this coming up. All right, so starting out with Skeletor, let's look at the size and the scale. Here's a couple of things you can look at. This is the vintage Skeletor, so you can see how much bigger a Classics or the Masterverse is. And this is a Silverhawk, which is considered a 5-inch, and this is 3.75 inch, so you can kind of get a quick scale look there. So side by side with a comparison to the Skeletor from the Masterverse to the Classics, I like the Classics way better. And here's why. Now, I'm not going to say that for every figure, obviously, but there's a couple things that translate over. Now, most people like the Masterverse better because of the articulation. Looking at these from the side, you can see that there is more articulation in the elbow joints, and you hide the pin, so the pin is hidden completely, and I think they might have hid the pin in some of the later, maybe the Filmation releases, but I'm not 100% sure. So when you get down further, and you can see the knees, so it's double jointed in the knees down there, so there's a cut right here that there's not a cut right there in the thigh for articulation. But for me, I think more or less it's a cleaner look overall on the Classics because there's less cuts. Even with the pins showing, it's still a bit of a cleaner look, but either way, not that bad. But I still prefer a classic toon look when it comes to all of these characters. Also, another issue is this guy holds his Havoc staff really well, but I have problems with this one's Havoc staff. It just doesn't hold as well. It really doesn't. So the gripping of this isn't quite as good. So there's pluses and minuses to each of them. A lot of people do complain about how Classics don't stand very well, but I haven't really had that yet on official Classics figures. And not all of mine are Mattel. Some of mine are Super 7. So, and I actually kind of like Super 7 look a little bit better because they went all Filmation. But if you look from this, the head sucks. So my son used this from the Keldor 2-pack Origins head. And let's see how that looks. That looks okay. So that's another issue, is people are trying to say that these heads are too small, and I do agree with that. I do agree with the comment that the heads are too small for the Masterverse, for their bodies, for their bucks, and they're slightly bigger bucks than the Classics. And with that, let's move into the next character. Okay, so getting into HeMan. Now, this is truly not a fair comparison because this is not a very good Classics figure. This is my homemade one that I use a different head. This is the Super 7 Atom head, and I customized it, and it is using Revelations shield and sword and stuff. So, well, I don't know if that's Revelations. Maybe that's just a classic sword. But still, it's not truly the best of Classics, and I think it blows away what they gave us here for Masterverse. And there's a lot of stuff to say about the one for Masterverse. The head, although it looks like the new cartoon head, okay, it's okay. I do kind of like the whole design of these better. Now, the arms, they look a little bit different. I think they're a little beefier on the original Classics one. And then you got the waist. Now, it's really easy to see on this one how they kind of have this waist, whatever. It's not even just an abdomen thing going on. And I don't know. I don't know how I like the way that looks. I don't think that cut looks great. I think cutting it right here the way they did, and it's almost always covered by the armor, I think that is a better way to go about it. So I like that a little bit better. So there's a couple of things, but overall the whole look and the design, I like this better because I like a classic look and the classic cartoon. And I really think that's what 90% of people collecting this like. Now, when we get into like Beastman and some other designs, I have some more things to say about that. But when it comes to the HeMan, I'm still all in on classic. Now, granted, this is not an official Classic. This is a custom, so yeah, he does have some stability issues. The other thing I don't like is the loincloth being just ridiculously long. I'm not a fan of that at all. And so for all of the figures, I think that is a big downside. But seeing as how you can cut it if you want, I mean, if you're brave enough, you can cut it And for a figure being 20, well now 23, I guess it's worth, if you run it and have to get another one, it's not the end of the world, I guess. All right, so now the bashing of Masterverse is going to kind of end because we got this guy. We got Man-at-Arms. Man-at-Arms looks outstanding. So it is a great looking figure, and in fact, next to Classics, it shines. Like, yeah, the Classics wins with the more correct loincloth looking thing, or whatever we're going to call that. But at the end of the day, I really like the way this one looks. Now, this is the wrong head, so it's more of a palace card that I have, because I got all mine as cheap as possible. I didn't pay the ridiculous $150 or whatever it costs to get an official one. And so when you think $23 to get this guy here, and he looks that good, and it's just, there are some aspects of this still that are more interesting looking, with all the detail on the back and all that kind of stuff. But overall, like, I could simply just swap them out and I'd be okay. I'd be perfectly fine. I could just be like, here, this is my Man-at-Arms. And you're going to see that. You're going to see that with a handful of the Masterverse figures. And that surprised me because I did not expect that from this line when it was first announced. And so now with this shocker here, Man-at-Arms is really a good figure. Really great and blends with the Classics extremely well. Next up, we're going with a Faker. And I do understand what they were doing with Faker. Basically repainting the HeMan into a Faker, and I see why they did it in a way to make him a robot and all that kind of stuff. There's a whole lot more to Faker. I've watched some videos and I'm not an expert on it, but in my mind, anytime anyone thinks of Faker, they think of a blue Faker, and so I think we are a win in Classics because it's blue, but I wouldn't put it past Mattel to put out a blue Faker eventually that looks a lot like this and gives this one a run for the money with the color scheme and all that kind of stuff. Because I think that's what fans really want. I think fans really want the blue and the purple and all that kind of stuff. I think fans want this color scheme, and I don't think this one's an original one, by the way. I think it's a knockoff or something, but you know, I really don't care. Okay, so getting into the Classics Orko, and this will be the last actual Classics figure I have on hand. The rest will be pictorial comparisons to the Masterverse that I have in hand. So looking at this, I do think the Classic Orko wins, but I didn't originally. When I first saw it, I thought it's too small, and then I started watching a little bit more of the media, and I got to understand that, yes, Classics is the correct size, and it has the correct aesthetic. Now, what they were going for in Revelations wasn't a Classic Orko, it was something else, and what they're going for in the CGI show is a robot, I think, so, which Orko is cool. I've always liked the Orko figure and character. I don't know about character, but I always liked the figures. But this is the Origins one, and it looks pretty good too. So it's one of those that you might consider the Origins version to put on your shelf. And so with all of that, Classic still wins. Classic still looks the best, and after a little bit of research or time watching the show, in my opinion, it scales the best properly. He's super tiny. Before we get into the figures for Masterverse that I have, but I don't have a Classics, and kind of deciding is it worth getting the Classics for, because that's kind of what this whole video is about. I want to talk about Beastman. So I don't have a Classics Beastman, and I got this guy, which I'm not even going to take out of the box because I don't see the point. I have decided to go 100% in on Revelations, but I keep one sealed, which I need to get a better box one, I think. One sealed, and then one I open to put on my display, and so with that, since I'm never going to display this guy because I don't see the point, then there's no need to open them. But I can have my sealed one and say, hey, I got a complete run, I guess. Same thing with this Tila. She's not my Tila. I don't have a problem with the shaved side head. I think I might actually do my hair that way eventually, but I don't have a problem with that. It's just this is not my Tila. I have no need for her on my shelf, and I really don't want my figures reinvented now. There are a lot of people that have been collecting Masterverse, well, the Masters of the Universe or Motu line for decades, that are excited to have a new iteration of their old characters, and that's not me. I'm like, hey, I'm trying to catch up, all right? I'm trying to catch up for 40 years of just not paying attention and not even knowing Classics existed. So for those of you that want something new, there he is. For me, I'm guessing we're going to get a classic version, a classic-looking version down the road, or they'll cancel the line. Packaging also has decent artwork on it. It's kind of fun. It looks good, but at the end of the day, give us more classic figures like Spikor. All right, so let's get into Evelyn, and I don't have an actual Evelyn, so I'm actually going to put some pictures up here of her, and there's two different versions that I've seen for Classics, And I want to say that this Evelyn will work for a filler, but at the end of the day, I would still rather have a Classics one. But for me, Evelyn's not one of my figures on the top of my list that I would want to get. And so for this to fill the gap for me is perfectly fine. I'm happy with just having this one on my shelf for now. If we do end up getting Classics re-released in the Masterverse line, or we get a more classic styled one, then I'd go for that. Or if I find a good deal on a classic one, but it's not the top of my list, this looks pretty good. Now you can see the difference between the other ones, so I'm curious what you think. Next up, we got Scareglow, which I think is awesome. He does have a soft goods cape on him, and I'm not sure why it's shifting so much. The one thing that really puts me down in my, well, there's two things. Two things that bother me about this guy. Number one thing that bothers me is that he only lights up in the head. He's only got that glowing in the head, and that's kind of a pain. Now, I can go through and trace, because I have the glow-in-the-dark paint. You can get glow-in-the-dark paint at Hobby Lobby and other places. I could go through and trace the glow-in-the-dark paint all over wherever that is and have them glow in the dark. That's a thing I could do if I chose to. I don't choose to do that. The other thing is that I like the Classics one better. And that's a tough one, because I really would rather have the Classics one than this. And the Classics one is stupid expensive on the secondary market. So hopefully down the road, maybe we could get a Classics inspired one. But the fact that we've already gotten this, and I think they're moving on to other characters, or they're canceling the line, but they're moving on to other characters, I don't see us getting a classic looking one of these Skeletors. So, Scareglows. So if this is the only one I ever get, I guess I have to be happy with it, but I would much, much rather have the classic one, so I don't think this is a 100% true decent swap out. Now we're going to get into Triclops. Now, I really do think Triclops looks amazing. And even with the longer loincloth and all of that kind of stuff, I really like this figure. Now, this is a deluxe figure. They are charging you a super premium for him. He's $30, and I think some places charge $35. Lucky for me, I found him when they were doing that 25 off 100, and so I guess you could say I paid less than, I think I paid like 25 if you just factor all that in. But anyway, I think he looks great. In this figure here, the color of the tone of the skin and all that kind of stuff, it just looks really good. And so for that, he is my Triclops. I don't even care about going after a Classics version, but the Classics version, and I'm going to show it side by side, the Classics version itself is a little bit better because of the head sculpt. Like, the head is bigger like it should be, and the body, of course, doesn't have all those cuts, but at the end of the day, $200, $20, and you're not getting $180 more out of a Classics one, and this one tickles the fancies. Also, at first I thought this was just stupid. I didn't like it, but now I think down the road, I'm going to be happy to have this little setup, and I'll probably utilize it. Maybe not on him. I might use it on other characters. We don't know what's in store for like season 2 or what's going on. So anyway, Triclops is a win. Next up we have a Stinkor, and here's the well, he doesn't have the smell. He doesn't smell, but I'm actually surprised how much I like this figure. Now, for me personally, now this is all this is subjective. It's my personal opinion, but I'd never had a Stinkor as a kid. I never had a tie to the character at all, and so as an adult, I'm intrigued by the character, and I like the color scheme. I really like how this guy looks. I like how he came out, and versus Classics, that's kind of what we're talking about here. I think he's a win. I think that obviously in almost every case, Classics is still going to be a little bit better, but I think with this guy, this will fill the gap and fill my need perfectly fine. And that's because of my own subjective thoughts here. But I think he looks great, and he doesn't suffer as small of a head syndrome as, like, say, the rest of these guys do. So, and maybe that's because of all that. But it gives me some hope that, you know, if this is just a straight repaint, if they straight repaint into Merman, we get a classic Merman. Well, I know we're going to get a classic Merman. Like that thing that's coming up, that weird looking thing that's coming out soon. Some people will love it, you know, but I'll probably hate it. But anyway, this thing is a win. Stinkor. There's nothing but a Stinkor. So next up we have FISTO. I hear he's a lot of fun at parties. So he does have a die-cast metal fist. Now people are saying it's die-cast fist, and before I open mine, I believe this is die-cast too. So it's the whole rotating fist, and it does have. So I thought this was all one solid piece, but it's this moves and this moves, so that's kind of cool. But you know, the rest of it more or less is the standard buck, and that works okay. It works great. Colors look amazing. Just the guy looks great. And so let's compare FISTO to a Classics version. And compared to the Classics version, I think he's also a win. I'm not saying he's better than Classics. I'm saying he's good enough that he'll beat the Classics. He'll fill your Classics slot if you don't want to spend $200 on FISTO. So pretty awesome, though. I'm glad we're getting these, and as each one of these come out, that really gets close to Classics, and in some cases, because of the articulation, many consider them better. It's really nice to have these options put on the shelf. So looking at that, FISTO's a win. And let's look at FISTO's sword real quick. Yeah, there's a sword. I'm really excited for some more of these future releases that'll come that I can put on my Classic shelf and just be happy with. So when it comes to Spike Ore, I'm just going to have to do picture versus picture. I can't find my Spike Ore. I don't know what I did with it. Do some digging. I might find it, but I know I got one. But anyway, for me, I personally don't think that the Classics one is a whole lot better than this one. I think this one will work. This one will work fine. I'm okay with the way it looks. But I haven't even opened mine to put it on the shelf just yet. So I mean, that one I'm still kind of in the air on. I'm curious what everyone else thinks about it. But still, Spike Ore is pretty cool looking. And it's a little bit updated, modern design, but a bit classic at the same time. So I think that if they keep doing that, like we get a Spike Ore or we get figures that look that close like Spike Ore, this line is just definitely going to be a win. Lastly, getting into Battle Cat. So a lot of people say he's too big. I hear he's bigger than Classics. Obviously, I don't have the Classics one, and his head removes, and he's got a nice little cringer face going on there. He has a movable mouth and quite a bit of articulation, way more than the one with the Origins line. So with that, I think this is definitely a win-win over the Origins version. You've got this nice rotating tail and all that. Now, the Origins is just basically like the vintage statue with a little bit of articulation. The Origins one didn't have paw articulation, so there's a lot to it. And then getting into all the poses for like before transformation, after transformation, all that kind of stuff. So this is still, in my opinion, an excellent Battle Cat, and it works. I don't think it works very well as a cringer just because of his size. I really think that the Origins one, I think you might want to customize an Origins one to say, hey, this is my cringer in the Origins, and then of course true Battle Cat. I don't know how much realism you really care for, and at the same time, I actually think you could still just get away with an Origins one in this line. It'll be a little bit too small, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. This one, some people say, is too big, and I'm looking at it right now, and I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, it could be considered a little bit too big. But hey, it's awesome. Okay, so we've had a look at all these figures for Masterverse Revelation. I think that's pretty much all the stuff that's been released. Maybe I missed, aside from Spike Ore, I can't find. But this is the vast majority of them, that a comparison to Classics, and there's a few other figures coming up that might actually fit in really well too, like Trapjaw. I don't have him, and some of that kind of stuff. So what do you guys think? How many of you collect Classics, you know, against better judgment, are currently collecting Classics and use these as fillers? How many of you just don't care about Classics at all and are all in on this line no matter what they put out and no matter what it looks like? And how many of you truly want the Classic designs and are looking for that kind of stuff? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you like this video. Like, subscribe, Hanger out.